I like to work from the ventricular system.
Okay.
Okay, and so this is a 3D view. So if you look at the, I'm sorry about this. There's nothing I can do about that. But this is what the ventricular system looks like in the human. Okay.
Right.
Let's move it toward the end here. So here are the lateral ventricles. So this is the body of the lateral ventricle, the anterior horn. This is the atrium. This is the occipital horn, and then coming down into the temporal lobe, we have the temporal horn. Now we have coming out of the third ventricle, which we can't see right now. It's there. See if I can get a good. Yeah, boy, I wish I could do this a different way. I actually have this. I have my own YouTube channel. I have this. Anyway, I'm trying to give you a 3D view of the ventricular system because there are structures that live alongside them. And the other thing is knowing the ventricular system shows you where you are in the brain, because I noticed that when you get into the sections, you don't even know if you're in the medulla or the pons. So here is where the third ventricle is in here, and it leads into the aqueduct of Sylvius, which is here. Poop. Let's see. Okay, so let me just do this quickly. So here's the aqueduct of Sylvius leading into the fourth ventricle, where the cerebellum is on top of that. Okay, so the fourth ventricle is associated with the medulla and the pons. Okay, third ventricle, the aqueduct of Sylvius is only associated with the midbrain. Okay. The lateral ventricles are only associated with the telencephalon, so telencephalic structures, meaning basically the large structures of the basal ganglia and the cerebral cortex. So if we look, we have the lateral ventricle is inside here, so that's the septum pellucidum right there. So this is the septum pellucidum here. So the lateral ventricle is in there, and then we see where the foramen of Monro just happens to be right there, leading into the third ventricle, which is all of this. Right?
Yes.
Now, there is a landmark for when the aqueduct of Sylvius starts. Okay? And that's this little guy right here. And that's the posterior commissure. So I don't know. I haven't memorized all my own voice threads. I don't know if that's been on a hit list yet, but it's a good landmark.
Okay.
Okay. So the aqueduct of Sylvius, all right, from here to here, this is all midbrain. So that's a marker. So if we're going to slice in this way or this way, okay, or let's do it here. If we see the aqueduct of Sylvius, we know that we're in midbrain, regardless of the plane. Okay?
Yes.
If we see the third ventricle, we know that we have to be, so in this plane, we know that we're past sort of the whole frontal cortex, right? And we have the hypothalamus here. So let's just go through some sections and start to look at how that works. Okay, so you can start to see how I teach this. Okay, so here's the lateral ventricle, here and here, and this is basically, if you look up here, this is basically the transition between the body and the anterior horn. This is the most anterior section I have today, and so we have a lot of things that we can see that. The caudate nucleus here is always lateral to the lateral ventricle, even down into the temporal horn. Okay, it follows around the lateral wall of the lateral ventricle, it's what we call a C-shaped structure. It goes all the way around like this. Okay, and I'll show you examples of that. Then we have the anterior limb of the internal capsule. How do I know it's the anterior limb? Because when you'll see later, you'll see it looks just like the posterior limb, but the marker for the posterior limb is the thalamus. So if we see thalamus, then we know that that white matter structure has to be the posterior limb. Okay? And then on the other side of the anterior limb of the internal capsule, we have the putamen. All right? Now, at this anterior level, we also have another striatal nucleus called the nucleus accumbens, and it's where there is no internal capsule down here. And it has sort of this characteristic shape at the bottom of the brain. So here we have the corpus callosum and the septum pellucidum here. So these are all things you should know.
Yes.
You can also see the Sylvian fissure, and now we're into module 6, so we should start being able to tell vessels. Okay, we have the optic chiasm here. We have this vessel in here is going to be the middle cerebral artery over here.
Mm-hmm.
And in here is always the anterior cerebral artery. So as it comes around the corpus callosum, it's always here and here. So the pericallosal and branch and this other branch of the ACA is up here. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that we know in this section. Get rid of all these. So we're moving posteriorly. Again, we see the corpus callosum. This bit of white matter here is also called the corona radiata. Again, we have the interior, so we have the lateral ventricles. This is the caudate nucleus because it's always lateral to the lateral ventricles. We have a little bit of septum pellucidum. And now what we have is the fornix coming down. And a great landmark for always knowing that, first of all, it's white matter, and second of all, we have the anterior commissure. And the fornix comes down, when it's coming down and starting to go toward the mammillary bodies, it is always associated with the anterior commissure. There's a little bit of it that goes anterior to the anterior commissure, and a little bit of it that goes posterior. The one that goes posterior, which is what we're seeing here, is much larger and easier to see. So then we have our putamen here. We have our Sylvian fissure. This is the circular sulcus. This is the insular cortex, or the insula here. Okay, you with me?
Yes.
Optic chiasm here. This is probably a bit of the uncus, which is making this the start of the amygdala down in the temporal lobe. And we've got on this, so another thing you should realize is that a lot of these sections are not exactly, it's impossible to cut them so that the anterior posterior is the same on this side as it is on this side, okay? So this side over here, right, this side's a little bit more, right, the right side is a little bit more posterior. And what we see here is the beginning of the globus pallidus right here. And there's actually a little bit of it over here too.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
All right. So we pretty much drained that guy. All right. So again, we have the lateral ventricle. So this nucleus that's just lateral to it is the caudate. We have our ACA up here and here. We have corpus callosum. We still have anterior limb because we don't really see any thalamus yet, but we've got some new structures that we can see. So caudate, putamen, globus pallidus. Now this black line here is showing you where the fornix would have been. They had, when they did the dissection, it got rid of it, but you can see the fibers here of fornix. Now we have a new ventricle here. That's this one right here. That's the third ventricle. So in the anterior part of the third ventricle, what borders it? It's the hypothalamus. So this gray matter all around here is the hypothalamus. Okay. Now, so here we have, I've done putamen. Now, there's another thing that I don't think we ever put on the hit list, but it's a good landmark to know, is here we have the internal capsule. But see this white matter here on the other side of the putamen? Well, that is the external capsule, okay? And it goes all the way down here. Whoops, I'm reshaping. I don't want to do that. Oh, darn it. It goes all the way down here, comes down like this. And if you look at it, it looks like a leg with a foot. And the foot is kicking a ball, which is right here in the temporal lobe, and that is our amygdala.
Okay.
So the landmark for finding the amygdala in this sort of section is to follow the external capsule down, find the foot, and then you have amygdala. Okay. Again, we have our Sylvian fissure, our circular sulcus, and the cortex that's in here is the insular cortex. So moving a little bit more posterior now. Corpus, whoops. Select my tool here. Corpus callosum, longitudinal fissure, Sylvian fissure, circular sulcus. A much better view now of the insular cortex. We have a new piece of the lateral ventricle down here. You can see this is the end. So the temporal horn, it goes forward, it comes around in the temporal lobe, and it moves forward. So now we're posterior in the brain in general, but we now are just starting to see the temporal horn. And always medial to the temporal horn is this squiggly structure, which is the hippocampus. So that's the way you find the hippocampus, is again related to a ventricle. Okay, so we have our caudate. Now we see thalamus for the first time. So this is now the posterior limb of the internal capsule, but nevertheless, putamen is still on the other side, and we have two segments of the globus pallidus right here. We've moved posterior to where the columns, where the fornix is going down in the brain, and this is the fornix now going under the corpus callosum on top of the third ventricle, which is here and here. There's a little opening of the third ventricle here, and this tissue here in the thalamus that interrupts the third ventricle is the massa intermedia, or the interthalamic adhesion. Okay, so we have another feature inside the thalamus, and I don't know if it's been on your hit list, but it doesn't matter. You can, I do teach it, so you'll hear it at some point, is that this is the anterior nucleus of the thalamus, and you can tell it's like a bump. And you can also see this fiber tract here going down, and it goes to the mammillary bodies, and it's called the mammillothalamic tract. Okay, so here we see a little bit of our hippocampus down here. As I said, this is more anterior on this side than this side. So we don't really have any of the temporal horn, and it turns out the amygdala actually, in most people, caps off the temporal horn. So we actually do have amygdala right here, a very small piece of it. And that's, if I asked that on a test, that would be kind of an advanced thing to ask, because it can be tricky. Okay. Now another thing actually is, well, I don't really see it here, but we can look for, this is where, if we see the tail of caudate, or where, remember I said it's always lateral to the lateral ventricle, and this is a piece of lateral ventricle. I think the caudate doesn't come around this far, So let's go to our next section. All right. So here's our lateral ventricle. So now we see still a small caudate. This is a more classical view of thalamus here. And so this is posterior limb. Here's our putamen, and here's a small piece of globus pallidus. Here's our temporal horn of our lateral ventricle. So this is squiggly guy is hippocampus. And we have hippocampus over here, and now we have lateral ventricle. And this thing right here is actually caudate nucleus. A little bit. Now another thing that we're going to start looking for, which is across from hippocampus, I don't see it yet, is going to be the medial and lateral geniculates will come in. And again, I don't know if I've given you that yet. So again, we have this aqueduct sylvius, insular cortex. See if there's anything else. We have this is the subthalamic nucleus right here. See this disc?
Mm-hmm.
This is a substantia nigra. So look, this is another thing I'd like you to notice. Sometimes I've had students in the past confused about these axons here. So we have axons that start up in our motor cortex. The cell bodies are up here. They send their axon down in the internal capsule, and they actually go into the cerebral peduncles. They are the same ones, and this bit right here, from here to here, is where it's a peduncle, but it's the same axons as all the rest. And you can now see the longitudinal fibers of the pons in a different view here than you normally see it, right here. See? They're continuous. And then they will come out down here as the pyramids.
Okay.
So this is the third ventricle here, here, and here. Massa intermedia. And just notice, so these are the cerebral peduncles, right? Let me get rid of a lot of these. Here's the cerebral peduncle, here and here, and this hole is actually outside the brain. It's between the cerebral peduncles. So it's not a ventricle. Okay, here's your fornix. I think I showed that already. As it's passing under the corpus callosum. Okay, so this is, oh, and I forgot to show you on the previous slide, this is the red nucleus here and here, just dorsal to the substantia nigra. This is a very similar section. There's not much new here. This is a better bit of caudate right there. So I don't really have much to say. Okay, now we're seeing something here that's interesting, that's new. Okay, so here's our lateral ventricle. So always lateral to lateral ventricle is the caudate. And now we don't really see putamen anymore. We're a bit too posterior. Here's a very posterior bit of thalamus that's off midline now. And this is the pulvinar of the thalamus. And there's a lot here actually. Now we're starting to see, so this is actually outside the brain as well. And the pineal gland would be in here. This is the fornix here under the corpus callosum. And we can actually start to see the aqueductus sylvius. So we know that this bit up here is the midbrain. And this is what I told you. This is the posterior commissure. You can actually see it in a different view going across. Okay, just above, it's the gateway. I call it the gateway to the aqueductus sylvius. Okay? And you actually still have, so this is midbrain. You still have substantia nigra here, and the cerebral peduncles going around it. Okay, now we have our hippocampus here, squiggly guy, medial to the lateral ventricle, medial to the lateral ventricle. And across from it, on both sides, we have this tricorn-shaped thing called the lateral geniculate, and just medial to that, in this view, is the medial geniculate body. And these are parts of thalamus. These are actually things that are hanging off of, they are part of thalamus, and the general shape of that is out like this. So this is all thalamus here. Okay?
I see.
Let's see. We're starting to see cerebellum. This is pons. Still have a little bit of insular cortex, circular sulcus here. About all I can drain out of this one. All right, so now lateral ventricles here. And we have a little bit of caudate nucleus. This is definitely pulvinar here and here. This is the pineal gland here. This is now the superior colliculus. And you have your aqueductus sylvius. So the superior colliculus is the roof of the midbrain. Okay, so we know when we see this aqueductus sylvius, we know we're in midbrain. Now down here, there are some things worth seeing. This is the middle cerebellar peduncle, and these are probably some of the fibers of the superior, but I wouldn't say a lot about that. Here's our lateral ventricle, so medial to that is our squiggly hippocampus. And we have just a little bit of lateral ventricle right here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to say this is actually, this little guy right here is actually the tail of the caudate as it comes around. Okay, that's about that for this. I do want to go back, actually. Oops. This is very slow, sorry.
All right.
So another landmark for something I forgot to mention. Let's see if I can go back some. Yeah. Okay, so here in this section, there's another feature that I forgot to mention. So this is the posterior limb of the internal capsule. It's about to become the cerebral peduncles. We're right at the border. Here's our mammillary bodies, here and here. And the optic tract wraps around the cerebral peduncles. And so we can actually see it here, here, and here. Let's go back one more. So the optic tract, you can't really see. It's probably this guy right here. So we see it wrapping around. This is the optic tract. It's going to end into the lateral optic tract there and there. It's going to end into the lateral geniculate. So once we start to see, so this is optic tract here and here as it's wrapping around the cerebral peduncle.
Sure.
And then it ends when you see this, there's no more optic tract. And in some sections, in other books and things, you can actually see the white matter coming into the lateral ventricle, the lateral geniculate, and ending.
Sure.
All right. So now, this is very posterior. That's not really much to show here. This is, I will say that. So look at the shape of the corpus callosum here. Why is it so thick? The reason is because we're at the splenium. So this is how you recognize the splenium in the splenium of the corpus callosum, in that you know your posterior. And another thing I want to show you is that if I were to ask you what this space is, the correct answer is the atrium. Okay, so I wouldn't accept lateral ventricle. It is part of the lateral ventricle, but it's so you can tell by the shape, the triangular shape of the atrium is a landmark for it always. So here's a view of the superior cerebellar peduncle. Here's the middle, and then this is a bit of the inferior coming up here.
Okay.
So this is the atrium. We're probably just getting into the occipital lobe back here. So you can see, you can look here and see where we are approximately. This line is, I'll tell you, this is interesting. The line's actually wrong because we've got cerebellum here. So we actually have to be either, we have to be more like this, right? So you, as you get really good at it, you can tell mistakes they've made in the book. Here we have the genu of the corpus callosum. So really, again, this is probably more like this. We have the body and then the splenium down here. So if I tell you that this is the top of the lateral ventricle, what nucleus is this? So now we're seeing in a different view what the shape of this is the top. We're very dorsal, but you can see they start to see the shape of the caudate as it goes back around the lateral wall, the lateral ventricle, which is all this. Now, we also can start to see that this is the top. Whoops, let me get rid of all this. This guy is more midline, and that's going to be the top of the thalamus most likely. Okay, so this is on this side is probably the sylvian fissure. That's about all. And also, I just would like to mention that this is what the corona radiata looks like. These are the axons at the bottom of the cortex as they coalesce to go down into connect with other parts of the brain. Okay, so now we see the lateral ventricles here and here. Now we can actually kind of see the lateral ventricle as it goes around and it's starting to get into the temporal lobe. And you can see this bit here has like a triangular shape. So do you know, so the atrium is shaped like a pyramid. So almost any way that you cut it, it's going to look like a triangle. So this is the atrium down here. What is this? White matter.
Would you be able to start seeing the anterior limb?
Yeah, this is the anterior limb. This is the genu. And now we see this round guy that's midline over here. That's the thalamus. So this is the posterior limb. So think in your mind, if we cut it this way, right, what it would look like this. Right?
And it makes more sense as to why that's the anterior limb, and because it's the anterior most part.
Right, so this is, there's no thalamus here, so this is the anterior limb. We keep going back. Now we have thalamus, and this is the posterior limb. Okay, so what white matter, so think about, we have the rostrum, okay, see? It's the genu or the rostrum. I think it's really the rostrum up here. So what white matter, so we don't have this, we're underneath the corpus callosum over here. So what white matter would, running in this direction, would this be?
Would it be the fornix?
That's exactly what it is. Good. Okay, so we're starting to see, so here's the anterior limb and the posterior limb. We're starting to see some gray matter here. Do you know what that might be?
Is it the putamen?
Exactly. So here's the caudate, just across from the anterior and posterior limb of the internal capsule is the putamen. Okay? So this would be the splenium back here. And you can see that's exactly where we went through. Okay?
Yes.
All right, now we're starting to get some interesting looks. So here now is the rostrum for sure. We have, now what's happened is the fornix is now curved and is going down toward the mammillary bodies. So it looks a little different in this view. And this is it, but it actually comes under the septum pellucidum, which we can see here. Okay? So this is the lateral ventricle. So what does that make this?
The caudate nucleus.
Okay? So what is this?
The anterior limb.
Right. Now what's this?
The putamen.
Right. So now what does that make this gray matter right here?
Is that the globus pallidus?
Correct. So what is this?
The posterior limb.
Right. Now what's this then? What's the marker for the posterior limb?
The thalamus.
Right. Okay. Now, remember I told you that the medial and lateral geniculi are just across from the hippocampus, and it always looks squiggly. So what do you think this is?
So let's see. If this is the
And this is the atrium, so it's medial to the lateral ventricle.
I'm not sure, sorry.
That's the hippocampus. You can always recognize it from the squiggly nature of it.
I see.
See, it always has this shape.
Okay.
And on this side, we don't. So the fornix goes from the hippocampus to the mammillary bodies. It's white matter tract. And so on this side, we don't. Again, so this side is more ventral than this side. So this is where the fibers coming off of the hippocampus. So just underneath this would be this, the hippocampus. But these are the fibers. So this is the fornix, actually.
And in this section, we can't see the medial or the lateral geniculate.
I don't see it. It would be approximately right here.
Okay, I see.
I just don't see it.
Here.
And here we have the occipital horn of the lateral ventricle. And you can actually see how back here, this has got, on this side we have atrium, right? See the triangle?
Yes.
And you can actually see how the ventricular system goes back into the occipital horn.
Sure.
Okay, so we have just a little touch of the very bottom of the corpus callosum right there. We have the lateral ventricle here. So what does that make this?
The caudate nucleus.
Okay, so what's this?
The anterior limb.
Right. So what's this?
The putamen.
Yes. Do you know what this cortex is called?
Is it the insular cortex?
Yes, that's insular cortex. All right, so we have this this white matter going across here. Do you know what that is?
Is it the anterior commissure?
Exactly right. So what did I tell you? What white matter did I said? So now it's going in a different plane, so it looks different. But what white matter did I tell you mostly goes behind, just behind, right there?
The fornix?
It's the fornix. As it now, it's going in and out of the page, so it looks like a dot when we cut it.
I see.
Okay. So here's the caudate. Then what's this? White matter?
The anterior limb.
Right. And then what is this?
The putamen.
Right. This?
The globus pallidus.
Right. What's this?
The posterior limb.
Right. Now, Do you know what ventricle this is right here?
Is that the third ventricle?
Correct. So what is this white matter, I mean gray matter, sorry, all around here? This is the hypothalamus.
Okay.
And another thing to know is that the fornix, when it's in the up and down orientation, is going through the hypothalamus.
Okay.
So do you know what this is here? This
Would it be the hippocampus?
Yeah. So um, this actually, this would be, I can't really ask you this, it's because it's kind of hard, but this is probably, and I'm just know it by sight, this is probably the medial geniculate right there.
Okay.
Let's see, what else can I ask you? You know what part of the ventricle this is?
The atrium of the lateral ventricle?
That's right. That's the atrium. Do you know what this is?
Um, no.
That's the pineal gland.
Okay.
So down here, we're looking actually down into the section. Do you know what this white matter is?
It's not the cerebellar peduncle, is it?
No.
Okay.
We're
No, then
actually
I don't know.
looking, it's the splenium of the corpus callosum. So
Right.
again,
The
this line is, yeah, this line
cerebellar
is slightly
peduncle.
off. I'm sorry?
The cerebellar peduncle would be lower down, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, I don't know what that means really, but yeah, it would be, we wouldn't have this view at all, or we would have to be a very oblique cut like this.
Okay.
So you would see a lot of different things. And so, that's how you tell, once you know the anatomy really well by sight, you can tell by what's in there, how oblique a cut is actually.
Okay.
So now we're getting more ventral, obviously. Do you know what hole this is right here?
Is that the cerebral aqueduct?
No. This is the third ventricle, the very bottom of it. So what's this tissue right here?
It would be the hypothalamus.
That's right. And do you know what these things that kind of look like breasts are?
Mammillary bodies.
Right. And they're actually the posterior extent of, they're part of the hypothalamus, technically.
Okay.
So here's a hard one. You know what this white matter is here and here?
I don't.
This is the optic tract wrapping around the cerebral peduncles.
Oh, okay.
See? And they're going around and heading toward out here somewhere, which is where the lateral geniculate would be.
Okay.
So you know this black substance here?
Substantia nigra.
Okay, so what part of the brain is the substantia nigra in?
Would it be within the midbrain?
Right, so what is this ventricle?
Is that the fourth ventricle?
No.
I'm not sure.
What ventricular structure did I tell you is associated with the midbrain?
So that would be the aqueduct of Sylvius.
Right, that's the aqueduct. So that makes these bumps, you know what that is?
Is it the inferior colliculus or the superior colliculus?
No, it's a superior. So when you see, pretty much when you see the substantia nigra, the red nucleus and the aqueduct of Sylvius, it's the superior colliculus. There is a landmark for the inferior colliculus, and if we have time, I'll show it to you later.
Okay, sure.
How to recognize in this kind of section So, you know what this structure is?
Um, is it the caudate?
No. We're down. So think about this for a second. We're very ventral in the brain.
Right.
So, so this would actually be the temporal lobe.
Okay. That's right.
What's inside the temporal lobe?
The insular cortex.
Well, no, the insular cortex is actually not part of the temporal lobe. It's its own thing.
Okay, I see. I'm not sure.
Plus, we don't see the cilium fissure here, really. Kind of over
I'm
here, but
actually
there's no
not that
insular.
sure.
It's the hippocampus. It always looks like the hippocampus means seahorse.
Okay.
So you have hippocampus over here. You should always be able to recognize it. And another thing is I told you that the amygdala caps off the lateral ventricle. I don't see amygdala, but it would be, if we could see it, it would be right here. Okay, I think that's about it for this. Let's see if we have some more. So now, I don't really want to go over much here. I don't think. This is into the pons now. This is at the
Okay.
border of the midbrain and the pons, kind of, because we can see what's called the basis pontus here, and this is now just opening into the fourth ventricle. It's sort of a transition between the, and actually you can see an interesting, see these black spots?
Yes.
That's a locus ceruleus. It's the only other black substance in the brain. Okay, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on these sections, but just kind of as a review to get you oriented, you should know this is the lateral ventricle here, right?
Okay.
So what does that make this?
The caudate nucleus.
Okay, what about that?
That would be the putamen,
Right. How about this?
the anterior limb of the internal capsule.
Right. How about this whole thing here?
Would that be the thalamus?
No? What's right
Would it be the
medial to the, I'm sorry?
So it would be the globus pallidus.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
So what is this?
That's the posterior limb.
Right. So
So
our
the
thalamus
thalamus
is good.
is medial to the
Yeah.
posterior limb.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Think about this for a second. What about this white matter here? It's going like this.
The anterior commissure.
Right. Right. So how about, this is an interesting one too. So here so we know that the thalamus, even though we're seeing a lot of white matter here that's kind of making it look funny, we know that hang on, this program's not really made for drawing. We know the thalamus is about right here. Can you give me an idea what you think this might be?
Would it be the fornix?
It's exactly the fornix. Very good. Okay, so how about this guy right here?
That would be the hippocampus.
Correct. All right, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. So now this is the first time we've looked at a sagittal section, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so there's some things we can see here. So this is the lateral ventricle right here.
Okay.
Actually, this isn't a really great question, actually, because I've only mentioned this briefly, but do you have any idea what this might be? So no, pineal would be all the way up here. A good landmark for the pineal is the splenium of the corpus callosum. So the pineal sits there.
Okay. I'm not sure then.
This is the optic tract.
Okay. Yeah,
Sorry.
I think I've
So
spent
So this all here. So we're lateral to the cerebral aqueduct, so we can't really see it. But you know what these two bumps might be?
The inferior colliculus?
This is the superior and this is the inferior.
Okay.
So this disc-shaped guy at the base of the thalamus is called the subthalamic nucleus.
Okay.
So again, I don't want to spend a lot of time. So here, again, is our anterior commissure. And you can see now the fornix, we've got a really nice view of how the fornix really looks as it comes down and comes just up against the anterior commissure and goes back toward the mammillary body, which is right here.
Mm-hmm.
This is your optic, it's actually your optic nerve there. It hasn't come to the corpus callosum. It hasn't come to the optic chiasm yet. Here's your superior and inferior colliculi, pons. You have your olivary nucleus here in the inferior olivary nucleus inside the medulla. So here's the fourth ventricle. It's kind of the first time we've really been able to see it. And you can see that it's associated with some of the pons, but mostly of the medulla. See what else I could show you. Really about it. So this is an oblique section from Haynes. So it's actually quite dorsal here, but very ventral here. And the reason we end up needing to use this is because it's got the VPL and the ventral posterior medial nucleus of the thalamus here. So you had those in your lectures. Here's the posterior commissure, and this is the pineal up here. This is the pulvinar. This is the posterior limb of the internal capsule, but it's then coming in here and becoming the cerebral peduncle. That makes this the subthalamic nucleus. And this is the fornix, but we also see the mammillothalamic tract coming up out of the mammillary bodies here. So we see 4 dots. 2 are the fornix and 2 are the mammillothalamic tract in this sort of section. Here's probably the medial geniculate right here. Or section. So do you know what hole this is?
Would that be this? That's the cerebral aqueduct.
Correct. So what does that make midbrain? I told you, when you see cerebral aqueduct, you have midbrain. Okay, so what is this giant white matter here?
That's the cerebellar peduncle.
Right. So what nucleus is here?
I'm not sure.
Substantia nigra is there.
And then the red nucleus.
Right, red nucleus is here. So do you know what nucleus this is?
I don't.
That's the third oculomotor nucleus.
Okay.
Here are the fibers. Here are the fibers of 3 coming out between the cerebral peduncles.
Okay. I see it. And the periaqueduct.
So do you know what bumps these are?
Those are the superior colliculi?
Yes, superior colliculus. So here is your medial and lateral geniculate. This is the optic tract coming in and synapsing into the lateral geniculate. You know what this is? I don't know if you've had this yet. Do you know what this white matter is called?
The periaqueductal gray.
Correct. All right. So what is this?
The cerebral aqueduct.
Right. So do you know what this white matter is?
Um, is it the
One more down.
superior?
Right here, this one right here.
Is it the superior cerebellar peduncle?
Well, it sort of. It's the decussation of the superior cerebellar peduncle. So what does that make this bump?
Is that the inferior colliculi?
Right, and this huge white matter thing going across the brain, the decussation, that is the landmark in these types of sections for the inferior colliculus.
Okay.
So that's because the inferior colliculus in this kind of section looks just like the superior colliculus. So do you know what nucleus this is?
That's the trochlear nucleus.
Yeah. You know what this white matter is?
It's still the cerebellar peduncle.
Yeah. How about this one?
Is that the medial lemniscus?
That's right.
So
Okay, so what is this?
on the previous, where does the substantia nigra end?
Well, there's a little bit of the substantia nigra right here.
Okay.
It's kind of the posterior extent of it.
Okay.
Okay, so this is there's a nucleus, a bunch of cells that are right here. Do you know what that is?
The mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal.
Yes. So do you know what this bump here and here is? What's this?
Would those still be the inferior colliculi?
Yeah, those are inferior.
Okay.
All right. So how about these fibers here?
Is that also the medial lemniscus?
It's a medial lemniscus, yes. And you haven't had it yet, but this is the lateral lemniscus here.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. So do you know what fibers these are?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Those are the fibers of 4. Those are trochlear. You know what this white matter is? Superior cerebellar peduncle.
Okay.
And your medial lemniscus is here.
So at this point, could I also differentiate the middle cerebellar peduncles, which would be on the sides?
Well, okay, so this is an interesting section because this is sort of a transition between pons and midbrain. See, we actually still have a little bit of the end of the cerebral aqueduct. It's kind of a transitional. So this is actually a little bit of the peduncle still, even though it looks a little bit like the middle cerebellar peduncle. Now, this is a more traditional section that we look at, but we're in pons, okay?
Right.
So we have, and you can tell by this. So here's our superior cerebellar peduncle. And now we certainly have
the middle cerebellar peduncle.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so these are the one at the bottom, those are the corticobulbar and cortico.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
tract.
Corticospinal and corticobulbar.
Okay. And
Right. Do you know what this is? Right. It's hard. I mean, I can't lie to you. This is one, and this is, there are two cranial nerve nuclei right there.
right. So the more lateral one, is that actually the more medial one, would that be the motor nucleus of 5?
Yeah. Yeah. So a way to remember it, I'm not very good at memorizing. So see this thing right there? That's the sulcus limitans in the fourth ventricle. Remember, we also have the sulcus limitans is left over from development, and it's all you can see it in even in the thalamus, in the third
Right, and I
ventricle.
missed
Sorry.
that question on a quiz, the sulcus
So
limitans.
if you draw a line kind of like that from the sulcus limitans, you have the alar and basal plate, and the motor nuclei are on the basal plate, and the sensory nuclei are on the alar plate.
Okay.
So this is your motor nucleus of 5, and this is the principal sensory nucleus.
So the chief, they're also called the chief sensory.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we have another part of 5 here. So you know what this would be? There's a nucleus and a tract right here.
That I don't know.
This is the beginning of the spinal nucleus.
Okay.
You know what these fibers are?
I'm not sure.
So this is these are the fibers of 7. They start down here and they come around. They go around the abducens nucleus and they come out over here in the lateral.
The facial, so that would be the.
So this is the solitary tract. So the solitary nucleus and tract is here, and this is the spinal nucleus and spinal tract of 5 out here.
Okay.
So the motor nucleus is 7, somewhere like right in here. Sends the fibers around and comes out. We have the abducens, and it sends its nuclei out more. It says axons out more medially. Okay.
Yes, that makes sense.
And here's our pontine reticular formation in here. So this is basically the same thing. We can still see those. Oops. Why isn't it drawing? There it goes. So this is the spinal nucleus and tract of 5. Probably the solitary tract and nucleus is here. Okay?
Yes.
And this is this bump made by these fibers coming around is the facial colliculus inside the fourth ventricle.
Yes.
We still have a
I think that was one issue that I was having, was actually like visualizing where the structures are in the brain slices when they're not marked with, you know, the blue lines that indicate where all of the nuclei and tracts are.
So what the goal for you in these ones is to, so as an example, we started out, so here, we're kind of winding down now, but I guess this is really where I wanted to get to with you. So we showed you a slice through there, and you would see the cerebral peduncles, you would see the optic tract, see?
Yep.
Right? And we had a slice through here, and we could see the fibers of the trochlear, And we would be at, this is the inferior colliculus here. We would be at the level of the inferior colliculus. So you would see when you slice this way, you see that as a bump on the outside. Okay. Now, the fifth nerve is kind of midway in the pons. Okay. So when you cut through this way, you would see, as an example, the middle cerebellar peduncle, right? You see the
Yes,
basis
that's the
pontus.
trigeminal right
And
there.
then this is right where the nuclei are. Okay. The spinal nucleus starts here, and it actually goes all the way down to the cervical spine. So the spinal nucleus and tract can be seen in every single one of these.
Okay.
In fact, it comes to the surface down here, and this is actually named, this bump here that I'm about to show you is actually named for, this is called the trigeminal tubercle.
Okay.
Because that's actually the fibers of the spinal nucleus and the spinal tract of 5 coming down. So this is the type of way, I mean, for me anyway, how to learn this, right? So you can see here's 6 coming out sort of at the border of pons and medulla, which is where we were, and then you have 7 out here, right? So which is right at the border of the pons. And then we have our pyramids. We have our inferior olive, which we saw internally as this big squiggly nucleus. See, so everything is related to, I mean, a lot of the bumps that are made on the surface are made by internal structures.
Study it that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me personally, I am a terrible memorizer. I get bored. So for me to relate things to other things is the only way for me to remember stuff.
Sure.
And actually, I do want to show you something. I know I put this in one of my talks, but let's see if I can find it for you really quickly. So you can find a lot of these on the net, but this actually is a very interesting thing. So it shows you where they're all. So just to orient you, this is the superior. Whoops, won't let me. Here's the superior cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle, the floor of the 4th ventricle here. So we see the oculomotor here, the trochlear, so this is up in the midbrain.
Yes.
And here you can see all this red thing is all 5. So this is your mesencephalic nucleus of 5. Right in the middle of the pons here, right? This is where our chief sensory is. And then the motor ones they put on the other side. So the motor guy is more medial here. Right, so all the motor ones are medial. See? And then all the sensory ones. So the other point that I wanted to make here is that if you slice like this, see, you're going to see, for instance, the trigeminal in so many places, right? And in the green we have the vestibular nuclei. So you can see you're going to see those in the number of sections as well. And then you have the nucleus and tractus solitarius. Look how long that guy is too, right?
Right.
So, and your nucleus ambiguous, we see in quite a number of sections, and then your medial and lateral, the vagus, the dorsal vagus motor nucleus is more lateral than the hypoglossal, which is more medial, down right near the border at the end of the medulla. See? So these sorts of diagrams, for me anyway, they help me relate back to the internal anatomy. So now we're getting into where the inferior cerebellar peduncle is, and this doesn't help us, that particular section. Hang on. So now we have the inferior cerebellar peduncle. We have another thing that we can really, we know we're in medulla because we have pyramids.
Right.
Right?
Those are the inferior olivary nucleus.
Yeah, and our spinal thalamic tract is out here now. We've got our real medial lemniscus, where it's supposed to be medial. And we've got the medial longitudinal fasciculus here at the top. This is our cochlear nucleus, and it looks a little different on this side. But we also are starting to have a vestibular nuclei here as well. Okay. This is probably the fibers of 9 coming in. Okay, so there's a lot there. Oh, and here you can see our tractus of the nucleus solitarius over here, and our we do have the spinal tract and nucleus of 5 is probably just a little bit is very closely related still here. They're close to one another. Okay, so now we have our vestibular nuclei out here, medial lemniscus here. This is the nucleus and tractus solitarius here. The nucleus ambiguus is ambiguous, but it's down here somewhere, and probably was in the previous section as well. Inferior cerebellopeduncle, spinal thalamic tract is here, and the spinal tract and nucleus of 5 is here. Okay. This is the inferior olive, and this is your pyramids here. And you have your, so this is your hypoglossal trigone, and the vagal trigone. So this is the dorsal, this is the nucleus of 12, and this is the motor nucleus of 10. And now we're into our sensory decussation, and this is where our trigeminal tubercle is, because now the spinal tract of 5 is out here on the surface. Okay. So here's actually where the cuneate and the nucleus gracilis are, and you have your internal arcuate fibers, medial lemniscus, nucleus and tract of 5 is out here. Okay, and then your accessory cuneate is also in this area, probably this guy.